group is Greenburg, Traurig. Steve and Monica. There we go. This is our lobby group from Washington. Chris and I and Jay went up and met with them last week and got into some senators' offices, talked about our concerns, begged for money a little bit, or at least made it clear that we're going to be begging for money, and looking at Stephen and Monica to follow up for us.
We like to call it lobbying for money, but
Okay.
really it's just begging.
Whatever works.
And if we have typos, that's Steve's fault.
Wow. Well, it's very nice to be with you again this year. Nice to see everybody. I want to go through most of these real fast because they're background to make this work.
Sorry. I just thought it was again. Hold on.
And for those that don't know, Steve's a Kannapolis native, from Kannapolis, North Carolina.
That's right. So our representation goes back to a pro bono matter that we did in 2011 for the island related to the sand management plan. And since then, we've been on retainer, and we do a lot of different things. We basically like to do things for the island, and we do whatever you ask us to do.
That's legal.
That's legal. We'll talk a little bit about what that is. So just background on Monica and me. Monica is an appropriations expert, and we're going to get to her to those issues a little bit later. I'm a North Carolina native and also an environmental lawyer. That's my original background, and I kind of migrated into lobbying. I do both things, but most of my lobbying has been kind of on the environmental natural resources side. I did a lot, you can see from this bullet, I've been working with you since 2020, and I did a lot of the helping Mayor Sayer and Chris write these comments that have gone to the, well, mostly to BOEM, but also some to the Corps of Engineers. Okay, let's go on. So one of the big issues that we work with you on is the wind energy process. And so we can go through these first slides pretty fast. You know about the process started in 2012. BOEM identified these wind energy areas, these two, and Kitty Hawk in 2014. Kitty Hawk has since been leased. I think everybody knows that Avangrid is the lessee, and that project is a little bit ahead. There was a kind of a dead period of activity from about 2015 to 2021 on the Wilmington areas. The BOEM kind of slowed down on activity, and then to 2021, really after the Biden administration came into office and started to emphasize offshore wind, there was a lot of pressure to identify projects that could go forward relatively quickly. And so that's that slide. The project that of the two Wilmington wind energy areas, the one that that BOEM decided could be addressed most quickly was the Wilmington East wind energy area, the blue one. I guess it's green in that slide. If you look at the west one, it's closer to your shore. It's also closer to Sunset Beach and close enough to the South Carolina beaches that North Myrtle Beach and some of those might have some issues too. It has more political complexity, I think. So the Wilmington West is something that we haven't heard anything about in a long time. They've done no planning and no plans as far as we know to start a leasing process for Wilmington West. Wilmington East, BOEM decided to lease in 2022. This is a passage from the final lease sale memorandum, and I put it here because it's kind of it's very pertinent to Bald Head. In response to the feedback received on the proposed sale notice, BOEM removed 13,474 acres in the northern portion of the proposed sale notice lease area. The final sale notice areas are located approximately 20 statute miles from shore, while a 24 nautical mile setback was requested by some coastal communities. That's mostly Bald Head, although some of the other communities also requested that, I think, after encouragement from Bald Head. BOEM believes its post-lease issuance process will allow for further minimization of potential impacts. So this is a partial win for Bald Head. I got a bigger version of this map. Basically, there are two lessees. Duke Energy has the one on the east side, and Total Energies has the one on the west side. Here's a bigger version of that map. And here's a version of that map that shows you the borders of the original wind energy area, the black border. The portions that aren't don't have diagonal lines in them, those were excluded from the beginning based on fisheries concerns. So they weren't offered for lease during the lease sale. Fisheries concerns, and I think, not sure about this, but I think the one on the west side, the little unlined block is Department of Defense. Those were both excluded from the lease sale. And you can see at the top, that's basically what we were able to accomplish in our engagement with BOEM. So 20 statute miles is 17.4 nautical miles. We basically gained about, I think it was about 15 nautical miles. If you go to that very tip, that's about 15, maybe 14 nautical miles from your shore. So we gained a little bit. And so what's, I think, important coming up is the process that's going to play out, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The leases say this, they both say this. So there's a preliminary term of 1 year. Both leases were signed by the parties in June of last year. So the preliminary term, this kind of like a getting ready to go period, is 1 year. That'll come around in June 2023. Then there's a 5-year site assessment term, and that's when the lessees are going to do surveys and meteorological surveys, and also what I guess it would be geophysical surveys. And they've got 5 years under the lease to come up with a construction and operations plan. So at the end of 5 years, so it'll be June 2028 is when if they're going forward, they'll submit construction and operations plans to BOEM. And that's the point at which, oh, well, let's talk about the operations term. The lease is for 33 years. And they can ask for an extension of that. If they get to commercial power generation, things go okay, they can ask for an extension of the operations term. Okay. So before they do anything now, come in, basically the preliminary term is to get ready with a site assessment plan. They've got to submit this site assessment plan to BOEM to get ready to do the surveys and kind of preliminary work that they've got to do. And that's got to include the survey plan. And basically each specific survey has to be approved. A communications plan, a fisheries communication plan, Native American tribes communication plan, an agency communication plan, and importantly for us, progress reports to BOEM every 6 months during the 5 years. Those should be publicly available. So we want to monitor those and pay attention to our opportunities for engagement with the lessees. At the end of the period, they have to submit their construction and operation plans, and the construction and operation plan is the basis for the environmental impact statement that'll be done. So in sometime around June 2028, that seems like a long time, but yeah, June 2028, they will initiate the EIS process. And as you know, what we talked about with what Eric talked a little bit about with the EIS for the harbor deepening, it takes a while to do one. It'll be at least a 2-year process. It could be a 4 to 5 or 6 year process.
Just to add to, with the progress reports that are public, even though they're talking several years out, we would want to look at those. And like you mentioned to our delegation on the Hill, everyone on the delegation asked, what are your concerns? What can we do to be helpful? That's where we have any problems with what's in those progress reports. That's when we want to go to the delegation and let them know what's going on.
And one of the things that progress reports are specifically supposed to address is how and in what form the lessees are engaging with stakeholders. And obviously for non-federal people, I think Bald Head is the most important stakeholder. You're the best funded and have been the most active in from the kind of community side in engaging with BOEM, and that really needs to continue so that we can get some more clarity about what the visual impacts are going to be and have some influence on that process. Again, you've kind of all that work that was done since 2014 achieved something. It's better than it was. But I think the lessees still have a lot of work to do with you to give you a very good sense of what this is going to look like to you, how it's going to impact the community, but also just what it's going to look like from the beach at 20 statute miles out. What is that going to look like? How's it going to impact your view shed? Okay. Let's see. So that's all on wind energy. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Just briefly on the harbor improvement project, we talked a little bit about that. I don't think we need to talk a lot more. Just know that in the 2022 fiscal year appropriations bills, there was $500,000 appropriated for the EIS, for the core. The core is part of the EIS. And this year, so it would be FY 2023 appropriations, which was passed just in December. That bill has 1.5 million in it. So total of 2 million so far that have been appropriated federally. So I would expect that we will see some activity here, some beginning activity. As I'm sure you know from Charles, the Corps did they did a scoping, kind of the scoping. It's a weird version of scoping. At the beginning of an EIS, the lead agency is supposed to scope it, and the scoping is supposed to involve all stakeholders. There's a public process. And they did that in 2019, but it was strange the way it was done. And there's a legitimate question about whether it met the regulatory standards. So they could come out here in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, and you could see a new scoping process. I think that's what they should do. But they may also say, we did that in 2019. That's been 4 years ago now. And we did that, and we're not going to scope again. We're going to go straight into preparing, I guess. So that is, I think that's all I need to say about that.
Steve, on the 2 million, are we thinking that's 2 million of federal appropriation funding? So the core district can get started with review that we know that was at a cost of 8 million.
Yeah.
That will take them to 2026.
Yes, and I think there'll be more money appropriated, and also the ports have to cost share on this. And
I understand they fully funded their cost share.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
There were news articles about that in may have been 2021, late 2021, that they've done their share. Federal government need to put up its money. So I think we'll see some regulatory action on the EIS this year.
So after it's all approved, when's the shovel hit the sand? What's that anticipated to be?
It's a good question. That this process will be, I think this EIS process will be a long one. Agencies will say, when they start an EIS, they'll say, they'll do a notice of intent to conduct an EIS, and they will start the process, and they'll say, we expect to have this draft EIS available in 6 months or something like that. It always takes longer than that. There'll be a public comment period. It might get extended. Then they have to do the final. They'll say that can all happen in 18 months to 2 years, but I think with something like this, it's going to be a 4, 5, 6 year process.
From what starting point?
From whenever we see a notice that it might happen. It could happen tomorrow for all we know, but I don't think it will. I think we get a little bit of advance notice. Charles, what do you think about that?
I think that's right. Yeah.
They've been strangely quiet. The ports, if you look at their website, they haven't really updated that part in a long time, and neither has the core Wilmington district.
And the scope of work is still getting bandied around a little bit.
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8 years out.
Yeah.
Same question, the prior slide, you want to flip back to it. You say 5-year period from the time the environmental impact study statement is done. So same question, when would that actually start? The building of the windmills?
I'm gonna say, because the EIS will start in 2028. And it might take them 2029 to actually get going with all the regulatory notices. The very best case is that they'll be done and ready to start construction in 2031, I think. If there's litigation or lots of controversy, it'll be more like 2023, 24. 33, sorry.
So 3034.
Yeah.
2034.
I'm just doing the decades, 2030s.
Yeah, that's right. And we can look to the wind projects that have gone forward, mostly up in New England. Some of those are in places that are not going to be this. It's not going to be. There are going to be different stakeholders and kind of different things at stake. But like Cape Wind off of Cape Cod, they had a lot of environmental group opposition and also local resident opposition and lots of the location well-funded local resident opposition. Part of this process depends on how much opposition, and I think your role in that depends on how much engagement and successful engagement you get with the lessons. What I should say on that subject, I'm going to pass this to you. We want to engage. We have not had anybody reach out from the lessees to us, but we want to engage with them. And Scott and I have been talking about that. Scott, you guys have a good working relationship with the Duke Energy person that you talk to. Scott obviously is the ideal person to kind of tend that relationship, and we talked about that. And he's had some conversations. I've been looking for a Total lobbyist in DC. I can't find one. I've actually got a name now, but I have not connected with her. And it'll be interesting to see whether they, Duke Energy obviously has an infrastructure here in North Carolina. I don't know if Total does or not. You haven't seen any evidence.
My contact at Duke was asking me if we had any information on a Total contact that I could share with him. So
Yeah.
even the Duke folks.
If you go to their Total's website, I don't know, do people know about Total? It's the French, it's like French Exxon. It's the largest French oil company. And this is their renewable energy sub. Anyway, we'll find them wherever they are. But interestingly, I think you can go to the Duke Energy website and there's a little bit of information about this project. But at the Total website, there's none. Yeah. So anyway, we're paying attention.
But this gets our mind at the back. Your footnote at the top says $90 billion worth of authorized projects have never even started. This isn't even going to get tacked on until that sentence is started or complete, right?
Right.
So that's.
Yeah, that you make a good point. That the timeline that we discussed assumes that the federal money will flow, and that's an assumption. It may not flow. They're not gonna. The federal government's not going to pay to deepen every port. They're going to make some choices. I think Eric, you said last night, and I think you probably got the best kind of on the ground judgment about this. Eric thinks this project will go forward eventually.
I think it will, but also when they go to construction, it's 30 miles of channel. And which end do you start at?
Yeah. Which is, you've got the bullet number 3 there. You're referencing the benefit to cost ratio score of a 30-mile channel versus a port that's right on the coastline.
Right.
So it's going to impact that. To what degree, we don't know.
Right.
But it's, I would think that particular score right there is going to hurt the Wilmington project up against a lot of other.
I think that's right.
Just have to wait and see.
I think people know this generally, but when they did the ports did the 203 study, it goes to the Secretary of the Army to review, and the Secretary of the Army kind of said, okay, but also put a long list of things that the port has to address, and that process hasn't happened. That has to happen before they can. Those things have to be addressed before anybody in Congress is going to say, great, let's do this project. So it's not a done deal.
And just before we move into Monica's portion here, update you guys on the NC Towers group. You're familiar, North Carolina, the governor's office, Department of Commerce has established a task force to help grease the skids and help make this offshore wind project in the Carolinas work. The most recent issue identified is how to handle transmission. How do you onshore the energy that's generated offshore onto shore? How does it fit in the transmission system? And how's that all going to work out? And the Northeast utilities have struggled with that. And because there's multiple utilities, in the Carolinas, it's simple. It's Duke.
Right.
Owns the transmission system from Moorhead all the way down to below Myrtle Beach and Georgetown area once it gets onshore. So that'll be simple. simpler for Duke than it will be for the Northeast. The other issue was there's a concern among the renewable generators that using the existing electrical transmission infrastructure disfavors them, that the utilities are going to want to control the flow of renewable energy and because it's coming onto their system. So one thought was, well, let's build an offshore transmission system that's operated separately from, it's got to be regulated by FERC in some form.
Right.
So there's a number of issues that have bubbled up in the past few weeks for months about how that's all going to work out. And I'm saying that just to suggest that it might delay the progress perhaps even more. So, and I know Rex, you've got an interest in this, and I thought that was interesting at the last infrastructure subcommittee meeting that's out there.
So who is most tied into the tower, the NC towers that?
Yeah,
doing that?
Jay and I pretty much lead away, but Jay's from the staff standpoints can help with that. So I meant to call you and update you on that, but didn't get around to it.
That's fine. I just got updated.
Yeah, you did.
But I think that is a great place to get kind of practical information about what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and what the problems they're running into. So, okay, we'll do appropriations. You can ask more questions later.
So we're talking about the federal government being slow and a lot of delays. I'm just gonna work into the dysfunction of Congress. A brief overview of just on January 3rd, the new Congress. Well, actually, January 3rd, the new Congress was not did not come in the House. They waited several days, and a few days after that, we had a House functioning. We have what changed in the 118th is very significant change. The Republicans have taken control, albeit a very slim majority. So the crazies on both sides, sorry, but they're not going to be able to have a ton of power like some of the Republicans thought before the election. The Democrats maintained control of the Senate, and they actually picked up a seat. That's significant because not necessarily for Bald Head, but for the nation, with a 50-50 Senate, Republican senators were able to stop nominations from moving through the committee process. So they had stopped a ton of nominations from the administration moving through for federal positions. That's no longer the case. Now each Senate committee will have one more Democrat on the committee, so they can move those nominees through. The change in the makeup of the U.S. House is not insignificant for Bald Head, because our Congressman David Rouser is now in the majority, so he's got a lot more power. He makes decisions on what bills he's bringing to the floor, and he has now become chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment. So he's got significant power and leverage over agencies that have jurisdiction. He will decide what legislation that committee will take up and what bills he will support in that committee. So it is a significant position. It gives him a lot more leadership and a lot more power in Congress than just last year. So the slim majority, we're going to have to be bipartisan, which is almost impossible. Having balloons fly over our country helps us to find some bipartisan ground. And you will see that on the news. There is a push on both sides. There are some really hardliners on the Chinese Communist Party. You'll see that kind of legislation and investigations into that. Appropriations, while the rest of Congress is very partisan, the Appropriations Committee generally and historically has been very bipartisan. In fact, even when the parties change or the majority changes, a lot of times staff on the Appropriations Committees stay. So if they're a majority staff, they don't switch over to become minority staff. You have expert appropriators and staff, they stay on majority. Obviously, there's it's a little more partisan, than it has been in this last year. Republican staff were not talking to Democratic staff, or majority staff were not talking to minority staff. And I have never, in over 15 years of doing this, I've never seen it that bad. A lot of that came from the infrastructure investment, the IRA bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, where that was a completely Democratic large spending bill that had no buy-in. So they were really mad, and they didn't allow any communications to staff or members. You might see some immigration reform. That's what I'm hearing, but I don't think we'll see that actually. I think we'll work on appropriations. There has been a big push. I'll come to that in a little bit, but appropriations, Chinese energy permitting. If you remember in the news last year and everything, with Manchin, he made a deal with Schumer to make sure energy permitting on the omnibus or the funding bill for FY23. That didn't happen, which we all knew wouldn't happen, but Manchin must have forgot. Like, that's how it works. So he still wants that, and there are House Republicans and Democrats that want energy permitting. So we might see some type of legislation. If that can pass the House, you have a Manchin and Capitol, a bipartisan, support for that in the Senate. So the administration during this time, because they have a split Congress, I think a lot of their focus is going to be on the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act, implementing those. There's a lot of money still from those bills that the agencies have to get out. So the appropriations and the budget, the process for the FY24 appropriations bills is very uncertain. When I mentioned that we didn't actually swear in House members for several days, there was a lot of deal made that some are probably so awful that we don't want to know about. But one of those deals was that McCarthy said that he actually prohibited voting on an omnibus package. An omnibus package is where you dump in the 12 appropriations bills and you pass them together. And that's how we've passed appropriations bills for several years now. We can't pass individual bills. We can't pass them on time, and we can't pass them individually. They have thousands of pages, and everyone wants to leave for Christmas. And they, we say that they're smelling the jet fuels, and they just pass that giant bill. They don't really know everything that's in it. So McCarthy has said that's not going to happen, and he's not going to allow that. I don't know how that works, but the House, however, can usually take up their 12 bills. There isn't a bunch in the Senate. You have to agree to top line numbers before you can move the bills through the committees. In the House, you don't need to do that. As long as House leadership, they pass through the committee and House leadership wants them on the floor, they can put them on the floor. They don't need to agree on top line numbers. So one of the good things is, despite, and I was kind of sweating bullets when worried about what happens when the Republicans take over the House, will they still consider earmarks? They had a closed door vote, the GOP, House GOP, and overwhelmingly voted to keep the earmarks. And I was super excited about that. I think once you start seeing a district next to you get direct funding and you're campaigning on what you're doing for your district, and then there's another member that doesn't have that ability. You start thinking every year, we've had them now for 2 years, each year more and more Republicans have seen that it's at least me making the decision what's going to my district versus a bureaucrat in an agency that takes years for grants to go through. We have 4 women in charge of the appropriations committee. I just had to add that. So we have Congresswoman Kate Granger from Texas, Rosa DeLauro as the chairwoman. The ranking member is Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut. And then we have Patty Murray is the chairwoman from Washington, and Susan Collins from Maine is the ranking member on the appropriations committees. That's never happened before. Throwing into a wrench into the whole appropriations process this year, and what makes it even more uncertain is this whole debt ceiling fiasco. And McCarthy, I think, spoke last night. Republicans don't want to, they want to increase the debt ceiling, but only if there's agreement to decrease discretionary spending. Democrats have taken a hard line that they don't want to do that. And some Republicans have also thrown in that they need to increase military for defense spending. So I don't know, it's going to be Biden versus McCarthy on and who's going to cave. McCarthy said last night that we will not default. I don't know how that plays out, but it definitely plays into McCarthy's demanding we change the top line numbers for discretionary spending in the appropriations bill. That's going to delay movement on the appropriations bills. And the debt limit could be going in, fight could be going into the summer. The earmark process, so just so you know, your delegation, Senator Budd led the effort in the House to ban earmarks forever. So I'm not very hopeful of him doing an earmark for us. I am hopeful that he will be supportive of increasing funding for Army Corps. If we have issues on various programs that we're not fitting into correctly, I think he'd be very helpful in us writing, changing some of the programs in the appropriations bills. Those are all things that members that don't like earmarks will usually help with. Also very helpful on grant applications. Getting a delegation to weigh in support of grant applications is very helpful. Senator Tillis, according to him and his staff, they have done earmarks. They tend to want to do earmarks that benefit military. So to the extent we can come up with some, I don't know, I haven't been able to do it yet, but come up with some really cool project that benefits military, we will go to him for that. And then Congressman Rouser is happy to help us with anything and everything. We worked with him last year on a program a project that just didn't fit into any of the available programs that they were allowing for earmarks. Being here today and listening to Eric, and I have, learning more and more, I have other ideas. I'm not a couple projects, but I have a lot of ideas that I think he will be very helpful to us. Time-wise, each member set the deadline for their appropriations request, usually in the February to April range. And then each of the subcommittees on the appropriations committees make their own deadlines for members to submit their requests. I don't think I put it here, but since earmarks came back, every member has to list publicly on their website which requests they made, not which requests they've got, but which requests they have made. So I don't ever recommend asking a member to put anything that may not be politically aligned with them or something that they're not going to be able to publicly campaign on, because they won't do it. So we need to find projects that they're going to love. We can, thank them publicly, do press releases, and that they're going to want to use to campaign on. The president by law has to submit a budget every year to Congress. He's supposed to submit it by the 6th of February every year. That almost never happens. They have indicated that they'll submit it by the 9th of March. I don't think that's likely, but you can just call me if I got that wrong, but I doubt that they get it to Congress by the 9th. That kind of delays the appropriations process too. The committees usually set their deadlines based on after they get the president's budget. There's been no earmark guidance yet. What I'm thinking, it's going to be similar to what was allowed for last year. Probably similar programs, though. Some of the GOP appropriators have said it might be more. They might take away a few, and their example was earmarks for oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word. When you go to museums, earmarks for museums. So then they listed some a huge amount of money that's gone to some museums that some GOP members didn't like. So they might not allow that. But I think for the most part, the programs that were available last year, which includes Army Corps programs, will still be in there. So we'll continue to work with the village and Eric on the earmark process this year, albeit it's again very fluid. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but there's always opportunities. You know, I did earmarks before the ban. I did earmarks, non-earmarks for a decade during the ban. We can tweak projects that would make it the island much more likely to get the grants. We can also do bill or report language. And so bill language is directing an agency to do something. And that holds weight of law. Now we do it every year. And you can do that. You don't need like a Congressman Rouser to do that. You could do that from another appropriator that isn't even, you know, like, I don't know, I got an appropriator from Arkansas to do report language for something, a client in Virginia, because it was tweaking the program. It wasn't specifically for Virginia. It was to address an issue with the program. And that GT has significant relationships on the appropriations committee, staff level and member level. I think we skipped through it before, but one of our colleagues is the former chairman of the appropriations committee, Rodney Frelinghuysen from New Jersey, served 24 years on the committee, and it's a bipartisan committee. So he's liked on both sides. And it's very helpful to have him around. Is that all I have? Yes, that's it. So I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, and I just wanted to say too, back to the wind energy and the turbines in every one of our meetings, the delegation, that was a significant topic. The delegation seems very interested in it. And what I was saying earlier is when there are issues that come up during this, we have made it clear that, you know, we want the problems to be addressed before construction. Obviously, we don't have time for that. But they seemed very interested in engaging at any time that we have a problem. And we use delegations all the time to send letters, to do soft touches with staff to staff. If we're not getting answers, we're not getting satisfactory responses, then we go to a member of public letter if need be. There's a lot of areas that we can do use them, not just on the funding side.
Thank you.
Just while you all are here, I just want to highlight when we talk about federal funding and earmarks and the staff and looking at prioritization of things that we have going on, and we discussed with Steve and Monica, for example, the wastewater treatment plant expansion project. If there's any funding to do road paving under DOT programs for at-risk coastal infrastructure. Public safety, between Alan and David, you'll hear at some point the unfunded mandate of the state emergency management, state highway patrol, that of having to get new Viper radios that meet current technology, and then it'll be a cost down the road. And then when we talk about the 2025 beach nourishment project, any programs out there, we recognize NOAA has a beach systems risk management fund that we want to possibly look to tap into. And then we'll have other initiatives, but nothing beyond that, but just that we're thinking about trying to figure out ways to tap in through this earmark, but also recognizing that one, we can't allocate or account for it in our financials. At least we don't want to, for obvious reasons. The other point is recognizing Bald Head Island for what it is. I mean, the socioeconomic status of the island relative to other areas in Congressman Rouser's district that include Columbus and Duplin. I believe that more rural, urban or rural areas that are stressed. That anything we can get though, that could be seen as a win and helpful. So,
I did forget to mention, thank you, Chris. The way the earmark process works, or at least it has worked the last 2 years, is these earmarks are for projects that can be obligated within a 12-month period. So it doesn't have to be finished, but it needs to be obligated within a 12-month period. Some programs are a little different in, say, 2 years. What I always advise are thinking about projects that you may have already decided to fund. That are almost project ready, and by project, it can mean a study. We can get an earmark for a study. But something that you're going to do anyway. So if you get the earmark, that earmark definitely has to go directly to what we asked the earmark. But that money that you already were budgeting for, then you can use that for whatever you want to use it for. So I always think, and it makes it easier on the localities and municipalities to think about, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what we've already earmarked ourselves. What projects fit into federal earmark projects that we might be able to then use that money for something else that we want to use it for.
What's roughly our success rate in turning in applications? I guess even Chris may know better. Getting money versus not getting money
For the earmarks?
for anything, any application we turn into the federal level. I don't want to narrow it down to a definition that's not the essence of my question. How many applications do we roughly turn in, and how many are roughly successful?
At the federal level, I can't recall anything that we submitted for that we've gotten an approval on.
The one I know about is the FEMA money after the hurricane.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we have gotten some FEMA public assistance reimbursement funding for storm events. So thank you, Steve. So yeah, we got one to replenish, put sand back on the beach from Hurricane Irene, Hurricane Florence, Part A claim, and then Part B, we know we changed over the scope of work to be able to purchase some public safety apparatus. So I apologize.
That was $500,000, right?
Yeah.
$500,000, yeah.
Well, this, for the public safety apparatus, we're in somewhere in the tune of 1.78 million, which is significant. But there have been other things in the past that perhaps prior council members could speak to or recall that maybe weren't a tangible, in dealing with, I recall with the terminal growing project and working to get the MOA approved between the village and the Corps at the 23rd hour to fund and fill it for the terminal growing project, which was a big ordeal.
I was just looking roughly, we got 10% hit rate, 90% hit rate, 50% hit rate. Sounds like it's a 50 the way you're describing it. Is that true of the state requests also?
We've gotten a few grants through Division of Coastal Management for some waterfront access programs.
I think that's a little bit last night. I think from our perspective, this is something we can do. We can do better. And that is, it'll help us to know as we, help us to interact more with the council and with the mayor and Chris and Jay to understand where you're spending money, where you feel like you gotta spend money. Because, and one thing we've talked about, we didn't talk about it this week, but there's a bunch of money in the infrastructure, the IIJA, but let's call it the BIF, the bipartisan infrastructure package for coastal resilience. We talked about that before, so we're looking for. I think it's fair to say you have some pluses and minuses for getting federal money. Generally speaking, the pluses are that you've got the resources to go hunt for it. That's the main plus. And you also are a coastal community that has some big challenges. Those things give you the ability and also the grounds for looking for assistance. The minuses are you're pretty affluent, and a lot of the, especially in the infrastructure package and the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of that money is, not all of it, but a lot of it is oriented towards revitalization of what are called energy communities, coal and oil and gas communities, and also underserved communities. But remember that, especially for, I think, for earmarks and also for applying for grants, you don't get a grant if you don't apply for it. And you between us, your resources, we have the ability to go after some of these. I think we have the ability to go after more than we have.
So do you have an actual plan for everything we fill out? I don't know if it's an earmark or a grant for everything. Do you guys have that discussion and put a plan together for what you're going to do for each and every event we apply for?
Not yet, but we're working on that. That's something that we've discussed just in the last couple of that.
And how long have you, because I'm speaking of this, how long have you been engaged by? Okay.
Since 2011, 2012, actually.
Yeah, I think getting a plan in place would, it's not too late. It's been 8 years.
Longer than that.
Well,
But Jerry, in all fairness, there was a specific issue that we needed their help on initially, which was beach stabilization.
Yeah.
We started there. And as the relationship's built, now we're seeing what else we can grow and make work for us. So I
good,
think the time is good.
good,
Build
good.
it.
I mean, I heard you mention talking about the wind, offshore wind energy, the view shed. And I hear that, and I hear that from people, but to me, there are other things that would probably make a bigger impact than talking about it's going to hurt our property values and our views.
Right.
And some of that, and Eric may know some, be able to contribute to this, but just the environmental impact to this island of constructing that out there. The shipping that's going to occur, what that's going to do to the channel, it's a
Ferry schedules, barge schedule.
barge, everything that,
That's-
to me, that's, we probably can't fight necessarily the wind energy, but we can mitigate the impact on the island to some extent.
The opportunity, one thing I'll say is, the mayor and Chris raised that very subject. I know with Congressman Rouser, when you were in town last week. They raised-
It tell us to, I think.
Yeah,
sure.
so, specifically about what the barge and, the traffic, construction traffic is.
Okay.
But I think in the next 5 years, there'll be increased traffic, but it's going to be relatively small. It's not going to be transmitting turbine blades
Right.
out there. But, we want to pay attention to those progress reports. And we want to very much be ready at the EIS stage to comment on this, and Eric's going to be ready for that.
Jerry, in answer to your question, kind of, and Scott gave an answer to it. I think that, and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth. I mean, we have in the past used any of our lobbyists, the group before you and now this, for hotspots, trying to answer questions. And we have just recently really started having regularly scheduled meetings. It's okay, what happened this week?
Right.
Okay,
right.
fine, I'll talk to you later. Quick meetings, just get updates on a regular basis. And I think it'd be important for the rest of the council to know that those meetings are actually happening. And therefore, anything that comes,
Right.
Write down on paper, get it to us, so we have it at the meetings.
You can't change the past, but what I heard was going forward. there'll
Going
be a
forward,
plan
that's
for everything we fill
right.
out. Yeah.
And I think that, even going to Washington this time, I haven't done that before. And I found it really a positive experience. I thought people were really responsive to us. And I think that, dovetailing more frequent meetings and our meetings, would be good.
Good.
And getting your delegation here.
Mhm.
That's what we need.
what I think it is, this engagement with like us knowing more about. I mean, we don't want to stick our nose where it's not wanted, but to know where you're spending money and when you feel like you've got to obligate money, that helps us focus on looking for places where there might be federal money. Otherwise it's kind of what do they need? We know you need coastal related, sand management and that kind of stuff. That is clear, but there's some other places where you'd have to spend money where we might be able to. So getting more information about that and more exchange of information will be helpful to us. So that'll be part of the plan.
That's,
So that, that whole thing, Jerry, with our financial long range planning,
Mhm.
and this dovetails perfect with
Mhm.
our conversations.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.